Welcome to the Banking After Hours series, co-produced with Backbase, where we sit down with banking titans to get the views on the future on banking and beyond. Today is a very special episode where I'll be joined by change makers and the brilliant folks behind Backbase. I'm pleased to be sitting down with you, the CEO and founder of Backbase.
Nice to meet you, Vince.
Pleasure. And we are joined by Karan, who is the Chief Product Officer of Backbase, and Thomas Fuss, who is the Chief Technology Officer of Backbase. So, you founded Backbase 2 decades ago, and the world has changed a lot since then. I mean, when you think about it, the first iPhone was introduced, in
2007?
2007? That's after you founded Backbase.
Yeah.
And 20 years ago, I had a full set of hair, so the world is quite a different place, right?
Yeah, totally.
Now, walk us through the evolution of your company and how you've kept the firm relevant to the industry.
I think Backbase was always focused on the customer experience, so that was kind of in common. But you have to go through all these waves, right? Yeah. Online banking, mobile banking. Yeah. But I think what I like most is that we had to pivot the company at least 2 times. So originally, actually, that's maybe nice for the audience, but Backbase didn't start in banking. We were cross-vertical. But one thing what we had in common, we basically said technology needs to come together in a very meaningful, easy-to-use way for end customers. Right? So the original version of Backbase was a portal, and it's basically an integration engine and a security engine to bring things together. And that over time kind of evolved into what we call nowadays an engagement banking platform. So 10 years ago, we made one of the most important decisions in the history of the company, and that is to take the platform and really focus it on a single industry, the banking industry. At the time, we already had quite a few customers in banking, but also in telco and in other industries. And beyond that point, around 2013, so literally 10 years ago, the company went all in on banking. And the reason is like banking portals or mobile applications are high frequency and high intimacy for the end user. And we realized it is not just about the experience on the glass, but it's also about the orchestration logic to bring all these different ingredients from the core banking system, from the payment rail, from fintechs, to basically create a platform that can curate all those ingredients and then can orchestrate them into customer journeys. And that's kind of where we are today. And you have to reinvent the company a few times to stay relevant and to kind of find the right product market fit. But where we are today is extremely exciting because you see all these platforms from Grab to Line to Uber to Netflix, and these platforms have tremendous power to orchestrate all sorts of ingredients, and then one push of a button and something is happening in a positive way. So that's kind of the impact and the positive change we're bringing to the banking industry.
I think it's fascinating, right? Because when you think about the conversation about digital just a decade ago, I think banks were thinking, should we even be on social media? It's a very basic kind of conversation, right? And now they've evolved to roll out digital channels. And then these days, we're also seeing more and more banks going into rolling out their own platforms, pushing embedded finance and a variety of solutions, right? And I think that's also kind of the direction that you are trying to serve some of your customers as well. But with the rise of this platform economy that we're seeing across Asia and Europe as well, how are you also evolving to be able to cater to some of this change and demand from your?
Yeah, I think it's important to go back to the root cause problems. And I think the way, and Thomas and Karan were working on this every day, I think the banking industry, the way it is modeled today, probably will not survive. Because the whole industry is basically an accumulation of 40 years or 4 decades of siloed technologies.
Yes.
So we have a mobile app, but it's different than the internet banking app. It's different than the branch. It's different so the industry in itself is extremely siloed and also extremely inefficient. And if you look at that paradigm, because of these silo applications, they are not per se customer aware. They always have been architected from the inside out, just as a channel to push stuff to the customer. And I think in this new platform paradigm, there's a major shift where you say, okay, we have to turn it around. And the starting point is not the bank. It's not the banking product. It's not the channel. The starting point is actually the end customer, of course, right? And it is a very fundamental point of view, and it's a paradigm shift. So once you say that, you really say, okay, now we have platform technologies, we have mobile technologies, we have AI, we have embedded finance, we have all these elements. But the core fundamental concept is, how do we re-architect banking around the customer? So actually you move from product-centric to customer-centric. You move from channel-centric to customer-centric. And once you have that fabric in place, you can do beautiful things. And it can be banking as a service, it can be engagement banking, and you can basically drive the whole industry into the future. But I think the root cause problem is that the banking, the way it is architected today for most traditional banks, that operating model probably will not survive the next 10 years. True. So it's existential, right? Yeah. And therefore you kind of go into, how do we move from run the bank into change the bank and drive digital transformation?
I think it's a very salient point, right? Whatever we design, whatever we architect, like you said, we start with the customer. And it's not just banks that are going through competition. I'm sure Backbase is also facing fierce and very intense competition. You exist in a space where you have established players, you have nimble players, you have a variety of players who's maybe dealing with the top layer, the entire core banking solution. And I'm sure it's not an easy task to constantly innovate and to keep ahead with the competition and fight for that pie of customer, right? So how do you guys stay ahead of the game? You know?
Well, I think maybe it's important also to say, like, if you look at the industry, there's some competition, but there's also a lot of collaboration.
Of course.
So let's first kind of look at you've got the system of record and you've got the system of engagement. So Backbase is 100% complementary to core banking system.
Right.
Sometimes we compete a little bit, but with Backbase, we really say we are core agnostic to the customer. You don't have to replace your core to be relevant for the future. You can keep your core as is. We can even hollow out the core. And so that's kind of the typical from, I think it's, if you think about competition, it's not about us or the competition. It's about what is the impact for the bank and for the end customer, right? So I think once you realize that, okay, we have system of record and system of engagement, big step. In the system of engagement, you can also curate and integrate a lot of fintech capabilities from KYC, AML, account aggregation, AI patterns. So in the end of the day, I think the engagement layer is all about curating the right ingredients from the legacy systems and from the fintechs, and then bringing that together in a perfect meal we can service to the end customer. So I think competition is great. I mean, I think if you focus on, if you know where you want to play, and we are 100% focused on the engagement layer, which is kind of the ultimate orchestration platform. We have a lot of friends with the lean cores, with the traditional cores, with the fintechs, and you can collaborate together. Maybe one final thing, we still compete a lot with custom build. So there's this misconception, I think, in the market where medium to large banks, they think digital is important. Agree. They think we need to differentiate, right? We need to be unique to tailoring value propositions to our end customers. I think sometimes they make the mistake by thinking they have to build everything from scratch. And sometimes I think people think like you have to become a technology company on your own to really become a leader. And I think there's a nuance to it because there can be a partnership where you have platforms like Backbase or other players where you can say that is the foundational piece of work and we can innovate on top of it. So I think quite a few banks are basically reinventing the wheel where that is not needed. Right, so you can basically reallocate your scarce developer talent to work on top of platforms like Backbase and have unlimited freedom to create whatever value proposition and whatever differentiation you want to deliver. So I think in the industry we can certainly learn something about how we can better collaborate to make faster impact.
I think there's the false equivalence as we sometimes see from banks. They think that if we want to be different, we have to fully customize the entire thing. That's not necessarily always the best route, right? And I think that's a good point. So from a technology perspective, how do you guys...
It's not just technology, right? So I think also ultimately what we're trying to do is put our customers in a position where they put their investments towards localization and differentiation where it matters the most to them, but ultimately the end customers.
Right.
And I think as we're working with financial institutions all around the world, from small to big, what you do see that is a huge overlap of commonalities where I think there is just no glory in doing all these things again, but delivering that message is, let's say, sometimes not always easy. But once you really have that these conversations with the CEOs, CTOs, or chief digital officers, it really, you see the click and say like, well, I totally can redirect my entire energy, more of my spend towards indeed the differentiation, which they're all looking for at the end of the day. So I think it's just really also a mindset change, right? This industry used to compete on everything. Like it used to be, 20 years ago, they would compete on hardware and data center infrastructure. Then they really started to compete simply on also just differentiation through channels, right? So we were talking earlier about, okay, they said, oh, we are digital, but in the end they had a website, but the website, it was just a door front to the same physical thing. And taking them out of that mindset into, like Jouk also said, like become more customer-centric and re-architect around the customer. That is the mission that we are on, and that we're also trying to facilitate the conversations with our customers to say, well, you used to have, there's no pride in having 10,000 engineers in your bank, right? That should not be the pride that you have. The pride should be in terms of what is the additional value that you're delivering to your customers. And I used to work for a bank, and I can certainly relate to meetings in which people introduce themselves with like, yeah, I'm so-and-so, and I have 5,000 people under me. And I was like, well, that's great, but that's not why we're here in this room, right? So
it gives them a sense of self-importance, right? But it doesn't really translate to anything sometimes.
But there's overall the mindset is definitely shifting. But I think that's what we're also trying to accomplish, is like create a more customer-centric view.
I think that's an important point, because at the end of the day, your bank's customer, they don't care, right? You have 5,000 engineers, 15,000 engineers, as long as the product that you deliver to them at the end of the day is what they want, that's what matters the most at the end of the day.
Even I actually keep telling this also to our own employees, so like even down to the technology, like I keep saying, like my mother doesn't care whether she makes a bank transfer using Angular, Flutter, or whatever. She cares about the experience, and it works, right? So
Cool.
I think there's two elements to this. Like one is kind of creating a 10x better customer experience. Like if you look at the Nokia's, the feature phones from 20 years ago, maybe you remember them, right? You couldn't play a game. You could actually work on a spreadsheet on these feature phones. It was not very easy, but it was possible, right? Enter.
Possible at a stretch, but it was possible, yes.
I think anything you can do today on a smartphone is possible on a feature phone. It was just cumbersome, right? And I think that was kind of the nice approach with Steve Jobs and the iPhone. They basically took a clean sheet and they were not kind of reinvent kind of the feature phone, but they kind of took a new paradigm. And I think that's the difference between feature-centric and customer-centric. And from fragmentation into a holistic end-to-end design. And I think it would be so, we now see so many examples where once you see kind of that paradigm shift, then it's figuring out like, okay, do I need to build all of this from scratch, or can I do this in some sort of a consortium? But then the whole energy is now outside in, and the whole focus is how do we make customer journeys just 10x better, from onboarding to servicing to lending to investing. And I think it's just great to see that now the front runners in the industry here in Asia, but also in other parts of the world, you really see the front runners, and they are not reinventing the feature phone, but they are creating their own interpretation of the iPhone. And I think that is kind of the future of where the banking industry has to go. And it's not always a given, because, a lot of banking executives are not Steve Jobs.
It's clearly not, right?
So there's that. But there are fundamental, we are encouraged by the fact that we see so many banking leaders on the technology side, but also on the P&L side, where they feel a responsibility to make their institution future-proof. So in a way, I think a lot of people start to realize that if we don't make this change, someone else will, either in our industry or new challenges that are entering. And that kind of creates, I think, a whole new dynamic, which is very different from 5 or 10 years ago, where it was all about, okay, let's do mobile, let's do internet, let's do social media. It was very, let's say, point solution oriented. And now we're kind of arriving at the point like, okay, fundamentally, what is the operating model? How are we gonna basically change the rules of the game?
It's like you said, right? It's all about rethinking the whole thing. I think it was Steve Jobs who famously said that if you ask your customers what they want, they tell you they want a faster horse, right?
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it's like all about rethinking all these things. I just want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to direct the next question to Karan and Chet. Europe and Asia are very different regions. The consumers behave very differently. They interact with things very differently. So when it comes to designing the products for the European banks and the Asian banks, what kind of special consideration takes place?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question, because indeed that's one of the biggest challenges we face all the time, because we serve a global client base, Backbase. And I think fundamentally we need to make sure our product is scalable, it's flexible, so you can change, you can tweak it based on the needs of the regions, right? Because if you can't, then I don't want to build a payments capability 5 times, right? So we have a universal payments capability, for instance, where we'll support QR payments, which are typical in Asia, right? Very common nowadays. We'll support paying to a mobile phone number instead of just a bank account number, which is, by the way, a bank account number is still relevant in Asia, in Europe, and other parts of the world. Or we'll, there's even areas of the world which still use checks for payments, right? So there's all of those different permutations and combinations that we have to serve all the time. And so I mean, when it comes to Asia, we've really been looking also, obviously working closely with many of our customers in the region to look at, all kinds of innovations we can bring for them or bring together with them. So whether it's, again, on the payment side with QR payments, whether it's, splitting the bill, whether it's different loyalty use cases. So there's a ton of those examples. On the retail side, similarly on the small, medium, and enterprise side. So on the business banking side, where again, that's been one of the areas where actually all over the world there's been a whole transition happening in how how banking evolves. And also in Asia, there's a big change in that, and we are trying to bring all the knowledge we have globally, but at the same time, see how it can be applied to the businesses here in Asia, right? Because again, the way of doing business is very different in the region. Yeah.
So I think Backbase, you guys set up your APAC headquarters in 2020, right? In Singapore.
Yeah, 4 or 5 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
But of course, you've been operating in Asia far longer than that before. So I'm just curious, like when you guys first entered the Asian region, what was like something that you found to be surprising that you've learned that's different in the Asian region than the other markets that you operate in? What were some surprising lessons?
Well, this is back in the history, right? Like back in the early days, like let's talk probably 2016. At that time, Asia was definitely the front runner with mobile, for sure. And also kind of the wallets, the notion of wallets, it was very particular, and still till today is, I think that was kind of unique about Asia. I think also the super app notion, it was kind of, Asia was definitely the region where we saw kind of that whole operating model, and actually moving banking also into a lifestyle application. I think that's all happening here. So that was also one of the reasons, with 2 major reasons to basically go here and kind of establish a strong foothold. So Backbase in total is around 2,000 people. 500 of them are in Southeast Asia. And so Asia is a very important region.
A big complement to this part of
it's absolutely complement to the world. The first reason was customers were asking us like, please be local and let's do these strategic transformation programs together. So hence building the local hub here. And the second part here, this is kind of a very fertile ground for innovation. So those 2 things combined.
Certainly. Anything to add to the whole conversation of any surprising lessons when you guys first entered the Asian market?
I think one of the nice things here, at least for me in comparison to some other parts of the world, is I think the regulators here have really evolved to be far more ambitious on the outpoint. The reason banks are able to really move ahead with single apps or super apps is because you've got really sort of regulators like MAS in Singapore or others which are really thinking ahead, thinking forward. I think they're really opening up the doors for being able to innovate, and I think that helps us, because that also is like, oh great, we never thought this was possible in the banking app with ease. Well, that's actually quite easy to offer in different countries in Asia. That's really good to see.
And I think it's definitely fascinating, because like when you speak to regulators this part of the world 5 years ago and now, different creatures, completely different creatures. So it's quite a astute observation you have over there. And I think one of the big challenges that we try to solve in Asia, and particularly in Southeast Asian countries like Philippines, Indonesia, which you guys also have operations in, is the whole challenge of financial inclusion, right? So how does Backbase help Southeast Asia and the rest of Asia to tackle this very important issue?
Essentially, it comes down to modern technology or transformative business models, right? So again, how do you make sure your cost to serve customers is extremely low? I think that's what should work.
The margin's going to make sense, right?
The silos, having all the wastage in your platform, your banking ecosystem as such. And with the Backbase platform, for instance, we make sure you can scale the platform from being able to serve simple single user account needs at a low cost, while also scaling it up to on the same platform to serve customers that want full white glove treatment, right? So all of those possibilities exist on the same platform. I think the second area is also we try to cover both the customer and the bank employee aspect. So we think of it as a whole 360, operational effectiveness essentially. So again, that helps you lowering the costs and in making sure that you can offer again rapid solutions, bring out brand new business models for your clients, for your end users, and really being able to enable onboarding of those unbanked users in a quick and elegant and effective manner. So I think that's definitely one key area that we essentially contribute from a financial inclusion perspective.
I think ultimately lowering the cost to service, lowering the hurdle for the bank on what you offer, but also through our product lines, and Karan just mentioned, for example, the onboarding, like make easy, frictionless experiences so that the banking experience doesn't become
a good experience.
And it's not just about being flashy, but just really making it easy to become a customer of a bank, and then making it also easy to understand how my financials are and get easy and transparent insight. I think it's just both financially as also on the serving side, just make it easy again.
If you look at once you have the platform in place, so a pointing case, for instance, the BDO Bank, one of the largest banks in the Philippines.
I think, in fact, it is the largest, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah,
it is the largest.
Probably is the largest.
So, but think about platform economics or economies of scale and incremental cost. They are servicing their retail segment. They're moving into high net worth individuals with the same platform. But now the more interesting part is that with very little incremental cost, you can reuse all those little building blocks you kind of already have with the platform and on top of the platform, and now you kind of create a composable app just really targeting at the unbanked population. So this notion of composable banking and composable apps where you repurpose these building blocks towards different segments, it basically means that you can have now a multi-segment go-to-market strategy. And they all run on the same platform, and the incremental cost to create these tailored value propositions are relatively low because it's basically reuse of 80% of the common building blocks that are already in place. And that's really cool. But that also makes it economically viable for the bank to come up with the model to service them with the right unit economics.
I think in the conversation of financial inclusion, sometimes we forget how important the term economic viability is, right? Because at the end of the day, for banks, while yes, they do want to fulfill the whole ESG duty, it's not a pure altruistic venture, right? So at the end of the day, it also needs to make economic sense for the initiative to continue to be sustainable, for them to be able to continue serving the underserved population. So to enable that, I think it's a very important factor to drive financial inclusion in this space. And I think that I wanted to call attention to, and I saw a study that you guys recently did. I think that was an interesting one. If I can remember the statistics correctly, you said that in Asia Pacific, the banks have spent over 100 billion to actually modernize and do digital transformation, but much of them were met with failures. What were the factors to these failures? How do we avoid these failures, given that it's 100 billion that the industry has collectively spent?
Yeah, this is really a pity because you see, like, people are aware we need to change. Yeah. So maybe we can kind of just randomly kind of share a few experiences. But like the number one rule you see is that people still have the misconception that you need to reinvent the wheel. So we've seen programs where people are all the fundamental plumbing to kind of do a transformation is you need to kind of almost like if you do a transformation, what you're basically doing is you have to decompose complexity. It sounds a little bit abstract, but like the banks are so complex. There's so many black boxes, there's so many duplication, there's so much spaghetti and system integration code that once you try to invest money in that current architecture, it basically will vaporize because that thing is slow. And that thing is never designed for agility or composability in itself. So I think one of the fundamental things is people are looking for a quick win, but you try to do it on the existing legacy, and that's not going to work. So I think there's a way better formula where you can say you don't have to replace the system of record. Actually, the core banking system, we can gradually kind of slim them, make them leaner to purely the function of the system of record. And all that different logic, let it be in the traditional core or in point solutions, let's decompose that into a more nicely organized microservice capability. Because in the end of the day, you need around 400 capabilities to run a modern bank, right? And kind of that's, I think, where people have been wasting so much time. So that's one thing. You basically are not building it on a proper foundation. And also, in all fairness, in the last 5-6 years, these platforms like Backbase were also not always mature enough or not available. So that's the first thing. The second major problem we see is that people continue to operate in the classic operating model of business on one side and IT on the other side. Literally, they are operating from two different towers. And so what we now see is the market starts to realize, like, you need to come together under a single governance model, call it a digital factory, and really behave like a tech company where the product owner is representing the business stakeholders and the engineers and the QA people are kind of working together. But like IT and business are not two separate concepts, but you really have to kind of do that in a factory model and then feature by feature. And maybe the final point is that an executive cannot delegate it. And I think a lot of people basically, here's the money, you go and do it. But what we see is maybe one of the most critical success factors. One, have a proper platform in place so you can accelerate on top. Two, create a digital factory where feature teams can focus on a particular journey and make that journey 10x better on top of a platform. And then thirdly, active senior leadership involvement, I would say on a daily basis. So to most banking executives, they're not used to it. It's more like outsourcing. But there's an element of it. This type of change, the successful banks, you see a 1-to-1 correlation with senior leadership being actively involved. To collaborate with the people on the ground, they're being educated by the engineering teams about what is possible or what is blocking them. And they can help them with, so it's a two-way dialogue where the boardroom members are educated and vice versa. The engineers are also educated about what is important for the end customer or for the business. And that dialogue is, I think, critical.
I believe, like I read from Forrester that they said around 80% of global transformation programs are failing. 80%. Wow. And then we're talking about more than 100 billion as a total spend.
So you can kind of piece together the number there.
But then I think to Jouk's point, also what they mentioned, for example, is the number one is the leadership and the bank, does it have a clear mission statement, what they want to execute on? And then the second point is exactly what Jouk also described. It's like, are they creating buy-in and clarity for everyone in the bank to execute behind it? Because otherwise you put that message out there, and because of the big tank or the big machinery, it's just layer by layer dilutes, and nothing is going to happen, right? And I think point 3 is also what you've seen as banks used to be working in an operating model that was largely around big transformational programs that would go over years and years and years to target then one outcome. While what we are trying to accomplish also now with our platform and the different ways of working is a bit more of a level of progressive modernization, where to Jouk's point, right, like you do a scan on your bank and you figure out like what's working, what's truly broken today, right? What customer experience is truly broken today, and that's the one you're going to fix first. And you're not trying to, fix everything at once and probably not going to make any progress. But just really driving that change in a different way and a different operating model with clarity from the top layer down to the engineer. I think that's what makes a difference, and where you see like the ones that are successful, they embrace this. And I think we see that also in our install base, like the most successful customers that we have, that they get great excitement from the top layer all the way.
And maybe just one thing to add, the other last element to it is obviously the customers, right? So I think one of the challenges is, are the banks truly understanding what their customers want? And they're simply thinking of it again from their product-centric view, as Jouk said earlier, in terms of just, well, I want to offer a loan product, or I want to offer a deposit account product, and it's going to be this way, rather than understanding what do my customers really need. And I think that's again where all the fintechs or the Grabs of the world have really also succeeded in understanding, well, here's the most basic need of the client and what they're trying to do, and how do you actually enable everything around it, rather than again going back towards the thinking in your silo.
Fascinating stuff. I think this few minutes might have saved a lot of people a lot of pain. And
for everybody who's starting a program right now, the chances of success are just significantly higher, I would say.
Much better survival.
We can still not change the culture of the bank, but like other elements like a platform approach, digital factory model, an operating model, a governance model. I think, and it's not just Backbase, I think in the industry with the strategy consultants, the digital transformation agencies, there's I think plenty of know-how to increase the odds of a good outcome.
I think we're also observing that shift as well. When we are in conversation with these bankers, we're seeing the blending of both worlds, right? In the past, the business folks are not exactly tech savvy.
No,
the tech folks don't really have the sharpest business acumen, but that's no longer the case today, and they're a lot more involved in the digital transformation projects. I guess that also kind of segues nicely to my next question, right? Because we're here today, tomorrow, for your big Engage Asia event. And I think your theme for this event is the big shift, right?
Yeah.
So what is this big shift that we're going to see?
I think the big shift is the shift in do you remember the Nokia and the BlackBerry?
I do.
That's a big shift.
Age is showing, but I do.
Yeah, for all of us here, I guess. So, maybe we have to explain it to the audience. No, but big shifts are pivotal moments in an industry where the rules of the games are rewritten, and it's it will define the winners of tomorrow. And what we basically see is that probably the banking industry right now is about to experience its iPhone moment. It will go not dramatic. It will slowly over the next 5 to 10 years. But the observation is basically just banks have plenty of features, but it's that paradigm shift into, can we make it customer-centric? Can we really focus on the customer journey and make that 10x better? And then can we go from fragmentation, reducing all the technical debt, I'm not exaggerating, I think, hundreds of point solutions, spreadsheets, legacy system integration into something that is leaner. So simplification from fragmentation into simplification, moving towards a single platform. You can do this you can build this yourself. There's many ways to do this. You can do it with Backbase. So this is not per se about Backbase. This is really about having an active dialogue. This is a pivotal moment in time. What is actually happening? What are the key drivers? And what can we learn from this? And how do we translate this into a recipe for banks here in Asia, but also in other parts of the world? What can we learn from this? And basically inspire the audience, our customers, but also prospects. Here are the best practices, and then let it up, basically give them the inspiration to figure it out, how they want to cook their own meal and how they're going to drive their own change program.
Wonderful stuff. And on that note, I guess maybe before we wrap up this conversation, maybe we can hear from each of you on what are some of the biggest trends that you are seeing in Asia that excites you the most, and maybe one last nugget of wisdom for our audience today.
It's interesting things that we talked about it a few times is really the financial super app. That's been something we've seen really come to sort of taking a big leadership here from Asia, and the whole world is watching. I think the way that's growing and sort of taking that to also other segments. Again, we spoke about small, medium businesses. How do they get the one-stop shop solution? How do we make sure that all of them have the same super apps meeting all their needs? I think that's one of the trends we are closely watching and also contributing towards heavily. So that's definitely on my top list.
In relation to that, right? I think many regions of the world people talk about creating for, but I think most concrete progress or focus we see in Asia, maybe also pushing to the lenience of the regulators. But I think that I find most exciting because we have always had the information about the customers, but now we also have the tech capabilities to truly create, completely personalized experiences. It's a journey still, but I think that's most excited, and I think it's happening first year.
Wonderful. You could also speak about one of the big trends that's happening in Asia, where we're seeing a lot of countries introducing new banks for the first time in decades, right? New licenses coming out, and I believe many of those are your customers as well. How do you think this will rock things in this part of the world? I mean, there's a lot of new banks in Europe that we can look at for some examples as well, right?
Yeah. But it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think on one end, I think it's great to see the new licenses and the neobanks, because I think they will trigger the old guards to change. So I think it's a change mechanic in the market, and especially here in Asia, you see that happening now at scale. Also here in Thailand, it's about to happen next year.
Exciting.
I think that's exciting. And I think it stirs the market, and it creates an incentive for the traditional players to reinvent themselves. So that's kind of one market segment. The second part on the neobanks, it's really a mixed bag on how many of them actually are going to succeed. So there's kind of a 50-50.
Also why for that matter. Also why for that matter for some of the...
Yeah. So but I think overall, I think the dynamics that it kind of creates innovation and a force to change, I think that's probably the most positive part. Yeah. The neobanks also realize that in the end of the day, they can go to market with a basic set of features, but how do you make money with it, right? Eventually, you need to kind of embrace the complexity of a more full service bank. And I think that will be the challenge over there, like how they move just beyond, let's say, let's do a credit card and a payment capability, but go into, a wider, like, look at Revolut, it took them quite a while. And I think they're one of the few that really kind of embrace the lifestyle banking application. So they are not even trying to mimic to be a bank, but they really kind of differentiate themselves with a lifestyle approach and with a wide set of capabilities that really help people in their financial life. So I think, to me, they are definitely kind of the North Star of inspirational kind of what you can do there. I think the final topic I was thinking about, like key trends, what I like really very much is, and it's more on the process side, it's not on the feature side, but it's the notion of progressive modernization. I think a lot of people feel like, oops, digital transformation, boiling an ocean. How do we slice and dice this elephant, right? And I think what is so simple in its execution, well, they're like, it's a very big elephant, but you can just slice it journey by journey. And just kind of implementing these journeys on a common architectural blueprint so that you're not kind of creating tomorrow's technical debt and tomorrow's point solutions. But that I now see for the first time a very nice, just evolutionary, incremental transformation. And I think that's exactly where most banks have been struggling with, because it was boiling an ocean.
Certainly a big shift. Huh?
That's a big shift. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, there was a time where making this kind of change would be career risking.
Still it is. It was not made. It's today. It's equal.
So to enable this approach, I think
it's way safe. You can focus on a real problem. You solve it within 6 months. You lock in success. You get confidence. You really create and focus on business value. So a lot of mistakes in the past was technology for the sake of technology. So I think it's a very nice combination of progressively finding a path to the North Star.
A lot of nuggets of wisdom today. I certainly learned a lot and hope the audience did too. With that, gentlemen, on this note, thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Vincent.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Ray.